Hi, my name's Damian McDonald. I'm one of the curators here at the Powerhouse Museum, and I'm the curator of Maton Australia's Guitar. Maton is a company, Australian company, formed back in 1946 by Bill May and his brother Reg. Bill was a woodwork teacher, but he was also a musician and an instrument maker. He'd been making ukuleles and guitars for himself and his friends. And that's really where his passion laid. He wanted to make stringed instruments for Australian musicians and out of Australian wood. So at the urging of his wife Vera, he quit his job at the Department of Education in Victoria and set about making guitars in his garage. And the quality and the demand for them was so big that the company took off. And the company's actually still run today, family-run business, employs about 700 people, run by his daughter and his son-in-law. So there's several elements to this exhibition, telling the story of Maton guitars. In this little section here, this deals with the Maton guitar story, or the beginnings of it. So in this showcase here we have the very first guitar that Bill May made when he formed Maton, a beautiful little acoustic guitar. There's also a selection of Bill May's luthier's tools that he used when he was building guitars for the company. And also in this showcase is Tommy Manuel's first guitar. Tommy Manuel is probably Maton's biggest ambassador, and he actually started on electric guitar. So he and his brother Phil would often pull out their dad's electric guitar from under the bed and play it, which was a Maton Master Sound. So his dad, because they showed so much enthusiasm, actually bought them a Maton Master Sound each. But Tommy Manuel switched to the acoustic guitar, and he's primarily known for playing an acoustic guitar in a fairly unique tapping manner. And he travels the world playing his music and talking about Maton guitars. But he never really played the electric guitar much anymore, so he actually gave it to Maton, and they have it on display in their little museum in the office, but they've lent it to us for this exhibition. So the hero of this exhibition is this beautiful design element, which is a 42-metre long wall with 129 Maton instruments on it. And it starts off here with 6 of the very first guitars that were manufactured by Maton and sold on the market. So the one up the top there is the very first arch top that they ever made and sold. And this guitar here is the very first electric guitar they ever made. Maton initially weren't going to be making electric guitars, but this one was commissioned by a musician by the name of Jack Wilson, and it was quite a success, and a lot of other musicians started asking for electric guitars, and that started Maton on the way to making electric guitars. And they're not so much known for that now, but certainly through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even up to the 90s, they were very well known for their electric guitars. And there's a lot of them here in this exhibition. It's themed with a couple of concepts and genres around the idea of the music that Maton artists produced. So there's a selection here of guitars that we've called uniquely Maton. They're instruments that really are very unique to Maton. Instruments that aren't really seen by other makers. Maton didn't really go down the road of making copy guitars, so they didn't really go into the market looking to undercut the big American makers, Fender and Gibson. Bill May wanted to really make signature Australian guitars out of Australian tone woods. So he did make a lot of unique guitars. He did a lot of experimentation, even with the same model. Often in other runs, we've found that there's unique aspects to each of those runs. So we would change the way that the pickups were configured, or the volume and tone controls were situated, and the switching mechanism for the pickups were all quite unique. Then Bill May was a jazz musician, certainly wasn't a rock and roller. Himself and all the musicians that he worked with were into jazz, so early on they did make a lot of arch tops for the jazz market. They're very beautiful guitars. Usually jazz guitarists like an archtop with F holes in it to get a really rich tone. And they don't usually affect the guitar. They use the natural tone of the guitar. George Goller is probably one of the best known Australian jazz guitars. He used Matons. He had a lot of Matons made for him. We've got one in the display that was owned by George Goller, and he signed it before it went on to the private market. Then there's a section on the country and western music. Australia's got a long history of making country and western music. It's quite a strong genre. And there's a couple of lap steel guitars. Maton made lap steel guitars in the 1970s for a while. They don't make them anymore, so these are quite unique instruments. Ukuleles. So the first instruments that Bill May made were ukuleles. He loved Hawaiian music, and he was in a couple of Hawaiian bands. So he made ukuleles for himself and for some of his friends. And he did make them in the pineapple type, which is the traditional Hawaiian version of the ukulele, and also the concert style or the Spanish style, Western style ukulele. There's some classical guitars and some folk guitars. They were big sellers for Maton in the 1970s. One of Bill May's daughters was a classical guitarist, and obviously she used Matons. Then there's a bass guitar section. So Maton made a lot of bass guitars in the 60s, 70s and 80s. They only really make one model now in their custom shop, but they certainly made a lot of bass guitars early on, and there's some very unique and beautiful instruments in this selection. The guy from Chain, the bass player from Chain, we've got one of his guitars in the display, and also Phil Manning was the guitarist of Chain. We've got a couple of his guitars on display as well. So after the bass guitars, there's a selection of rock and roll guitars. So as I mentioned, Bill May wasn't a big rock and roller. He didn't really like rock music, but rock and roll certainly put Maton on the map, particularly in the 70s and 80s. So there's a nice selection here of hot rod guitars, including really the one exception to the rule of making original guitars was they made a range in the late 80s of super strats with the Vulture headstock. That's really all guitarists wanted a Jackson or a BC Rich style guitar in the late 80s and early 90s. So I assume just to have a piece of the market, they did make a range of super strats with locking nuts and tremolos on them. Also, Maton did make a range of amplifiers. Starting in the 1950s, they really had to go into amplifier manufacturing because the guitar dealers would only sell guitars with amplifiers because that was just the way that they sold guitars. So there's some beautiful little boutique little amps in here, little valve amps. And they continued to make amplifiers up until the 1970s, and there's a couple of big professional model amplifiers in here as well. The other element that we have that we unfortunately can't really use at the moment because of COVID restrictions, but should they lift, we've also included a interactive in the exhibition. So we've actually got a guitar from Maton that you can play, and we've also installed cameras inside it. So there's a camera inside the sound box, and there is also a camera facing down the neck. So the idea is when you come in and play this guitar, you'll see your fingers doing the picking up on the big screen there. And while COVID's on, we're not allowing people to do it for obvious reasons, but our own Ben Rumble did a little demo for us, and that's playing on the screen so people can get the idea of what it's all about. So the final element of the exhibition is a display of all the cases. So all of these guitars that we have on the guitar wall obviously came in guitar cases, and we just thought it would be a nice touch to sort of create a backstage area. So all of the cases that belong to the guitars on the wall, we've created a display here that he's just highlighting the interesting aspects of the guitar cases. They're they're not brand new, so a lot of them are worn. They've seen a lot of use around the pubs in Australia, and it's just a nice little touch to finish off the exhibition. Also, I should mention that in the exhibition there is great big light boxes. So we have a light box with Keith Richards, who was a Maton user for a short time. He used a Maton while he was recording the album Let It Burn, and on the song Gimme Shelter, he played a Maton on that as well. Then we've also got, here is a light box with Brodie Dale. Brodie Dale is an Australian lass, and she is in a band called the Distillers. She's an exclusive Maton user, and we can only assume that she became a Maton user because she married Josh Homme, who's the guitarist in Queens of the Stone Age, who is an exclusive Maton user. He loves Maton guitars. And then there's also 2 slideshows. So at either end of the guitar wall there's a slideshow. At the left end of the wall there's a slideshow of musicians who were early users of Maton guitars, and then on the other end we've got a slideshow of contemporary users of Maton guitars.